Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. No place to go. The first job I ever had was at the local nightly news station. Ours was an hour-long show, but the station was too small and too shitty to produce anywhere near an hour's worth of reporting. So about 35 minutes of that was just responding to the viewers. It was my job to field the calls that came in, to take the information from the irrelevant ones, put the interesting or important ones on hold so that they could actually talk to the show and tell the freaks and the crazies to fuck off in the nicest possible tone so that no one make a complaint about us. It was a small show, not really even worth people's time to fuck with, and the job was pretty cruisy. I'd heard horror stories of racist ranters and the like from people with the same job at other stations, but I never had to deal with anything even approaching crazy. That is, until the day I got the calls for Melissa. Melissa was our news anchor, maybe a year older than me, but with a better degree from a better school and a Barbie doll body, which meant that she sat in front of the camera and I sat in a tiny little room that I'm pretty sure used to be a toilet. If I sound jealous, I'm not. Her pay was probably double mine, but honestly, I wouldn't have taken her job for quadruple. Maybe a third of the calls we got were purely because of her. Lonely perverts wanting to talk to a pretty face, drunk frat boys on a bet, 40-year-old dads who'd breathlessly tell me all the political issues they want to discuss, like I couldn't tell they were masturbating. Thanks, but no thanks. If I hadn't made it this clear already, my job was a joke. I got it because I was the only applicant who had a Twitter, and they got me because they were the only thing resembling a news agency that was willing to hire me. Part of some misguided effort to connect with some mythical younger demographic who care about the news, but don't get it from Jon Stewart. My official title was social media expert, which kind of tells you all you need to know about the place. I posted competitions on Facebook about once a month. I responded to the 2 misspelled tweets and 1 angry text that we got per night, and I answered the phones. That was me. My last night on the job was the 6th of May, 2010. I remember because what became known as the flash crash, some big downward spike in the Dow Jones that happened that day. Our producer had about $2,000 tied up in stock and so considered himself some kind of investment guru and decided in his infinite wisdom that this was the kind of story that people watching local nightly news gave a shit about. It wasn't. The lines that night were pretty much dead, with even the perverts having been put to sleep. All the calls that were coming in through were old people who wanted the story re-explained to them and didn't realize they could Google it. Shit. Maybe they did realize they could Google it and just preferred to have me do it for them. Fair game to them, if that was the case. Regardless, what this meant was that anyone who sounded like they had even the remotest idea what they were talking about was being put through to Melissa, the anchor, pretty much automatically. We were maybe 20 minutes into the show and already Melissa was patting, reiterating the story for probably the 3rd time. Our producer was so confident in the interest this would garner that he hadn't prepared any other material, and it looked like Melissa's night was going to be fucking terrible. Putting the same knockout boring story into slightly different wording over and over for an hour. My night, on the other hand, was shaping up great. I had a good book, I had a little hip flask of brandy, and I had pretty much nothing to do for an hour. Easy money. When the call came through, it's silent for almost 10 seconds. That's a long fucking time on the phone. We're told to wait for 5 because a lot of our callers, the serious ones, tended to be old as fuck and perhaps weren't 100% certain how their phones operated. It's bad manners to hang up on people, I guess, so we count to 5 before hitting the little red button. Tonight I gave them a little longer. Fuck it. No calls pending, nothing better to do. And if it's a mobile, it's their money. It goes about 10 seconds. Then someone speaks. Please Melissa? They sound like they've dropped the phone. Their voice is far away and kind of scratchy. A bad connection, maybe. I remember wondering if shitty connections explain all the calls where no one says anything. You want to speak to Melissa? Usually I'd say sir or madam, but I can't quite pick the gender. It's low but soft. There's another big pause before they say anything. Please, Melissa? Please, Melissa, please. Okay there, buddy. The weird calls are guys, always. Whether they're taking the piss or whether they're genuinely nuts, the weird ones are always dudes. 100% of the time, guaranteed. Girls just have better shit to do, I guess. Melissa, please, Melissa. Please. I hung up mid-sentence. Immediately, the phone starts ringing. I hit the answer button, say my little welcoming bit, and wait to see if it's the same person. Please. Well, I hang up again and hit the black button. This is not a headache I need right now. About 5 minutes before they ring again, probably the time it took them to get another phone. I blocked that one too. The next call comes in about 2. The one after comes only a minute later. Pretty soon, the delay's only a matter of seconds. Either this prankster's just wandered into a phone store or some weird shit is going on. The next time they answer, I don't hang up. Please, Melissa. Please. Look, this is probably some kind of offense. I realize that isn't the strongest start. Stop this right now or I'll call the police. They hadn't even paused to let me talk. Just kept right on. Pleasing. I wait a little, then put them on mute without hanging up on them. They can talk all they want as long as I don't have to listen to it. I meant to log on all the calls in this little book they give us, and I've written the TI of time wasting when my work phone starts to ring. This is the point at which I start to freak out. This isn't my personal phone. It's not one of my friends calling me to piss me off. The only people who have this number work at the studio, and all of their numbers are already programmed into the phone. There's simply no reasonable explanation for anyone to be calling this. I push answer, already knowing in my heart what's coming. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please. They're talking faster now, sounding frantic, desperate. I flick off the mute on the switchboard, and they're still going there. 2. Melissa, please. Melissa, please. There are calls waiting. I go to the next one, and it's the same thing. Melissa, please. Melissa, please. So I'm just fucking done at this point. I switch my phone off and take the battery out for good measure. The switchboard comes out of the wall. Half of me thinks that tomorrow I'm going to be told about this crazy joke from someone and that I'll be embarrassed about how much they managed to scare me. The other half of me is genuinely terrified. I grab my cigarettes, grab my personal cell phone, and go to head outside to smoke. My cell's on silent. Whenever I'm working, it's more professionalism that the job probably deserves. But I figure it's a good habit to get into, so what? I check it now. 71 messages from 71 different numbers, all unknown. I open the first. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa, please. The second's pretty much the same. Melissa, please, Melissa, please. I don't look at it any more of them. My phone starts to ring. I turn it off. Then for good reason, I pry open the casing and take the battery out too. I drop it on the table and I'm out the door because fuck that. The door to my quasi-office isn't quite soundproof, but it's about as close to it as the studio could get on their budget, and it's pretty thick. I slam it closed, and I can't even describe the feeling of relief that washes over me at having a barrier between me and all the weird shit going on in there. I can still hear the ringing if I strain, but it sounds faint, less real. I stand there for a moment, my back to the door, letting my breathing slow and waiting for my heart to stop pounding in my ears. As it does, I realize I can hear knocking. Sounds like it's coming from the front of the studio, out by the entrance. The corridors leading out there are dirty linoleum, poorly lit but loud as you wouldn't believe. Half of me wants to stay as far away from whatever's making that sound as possible. But I guess at that point, I was still clinging to the hope that all this might just be one big, elaborate prank. And the other half really wanted to find out who was behind it so this could all be over. Either way, I remember being very clear on not wanting whoever was down there to hear me coming, so I slipped off my shoes so I'm not making like a total clatter as I walk down the corridor. I can feel my heart quicken as I get closer to the door and the floor is cold on my bare feet. I walk as slowly, quietly as I can, one hand clamped over my mouth to make sure I stay quiet. I get closer, and it gets louder. It's coming from the front door, the only way into the building. It's persistent too. Whoever's out there isn't taking breaks, isn't pausing, isn't doing anything apart from knock and knock and knock. It's an old building, and there's no way anyone out front can see in. Just a wall with a door in it. There's a peephole though, so I can see out. So I get to the door and put my hands on it, feeling the knocking through the wood. Painfully, slowly, I put my eye to the hole. Barely breathing now, my whole body tense. It's been painted over on the other side. Last Christmas. Fuck! How had I forgotten? I can see the brushwork, weird and distorted through the fisheye lens. The knocking hasn't stopped either, and with my face right up to the door, I can hear something else too. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please, Melissa. Please. The knocking's getting louder still, banging now, erratic and animal. It sounds like something's throwing itself against the door, 6 inches of oak, and the door's shaking now, actually creaking with the impact of the blows. At this point, I'm pretty much just thinking, fuck this. I'm going to get my phone and I'm going to call the cops. At that point, I would rather have taken any amount of teasing and embarrassment about being pranked the next day than stay in that studio. This was Melissa's problem, and I had just zero interest in being between her and this freaky fucking shit. I am out of there. Make no effort to be quiet on the way back to my little room, and I'm back there in record time. I grab my phone, pop out the pin, and jam the battery back in. All I need is emergency call function here, and the last thing I want is to be seeing all the messages this freak's left me. I misentered my PIN code twice before my shaking fingers managed to hit 4 correct numbers in a row, and then I'm 2/3 of the way through calling 911 when the ringing starts again from the switchboard, which had unplugged. Unless the machine plugged itself back in, the only explanation is that someone else had been in there. I remember looking around when I realized that, as if someone could actually hide from me in a room that I probably couldn't lie down in, it's so small. I'm by myself in here, but above the ringing, I can hear knocking still. I couldn't make it out when I was inside here earlier, but now it's nearly as loud as the ringing. Either something's bashing the shit out of the front door, or whatever's making the sound has gotten closer. Someone was in here earlier. They're probably still in the building. They know you're in here. They knew when you left. They knew you'd come back. The studio phone's still ringing. It's the only one ringing now, but that's more than enough to have me shitting myself. I take a step towards the ringing phone, and the knocking outside grows fainter. I think it's just my brain fucking with me, that it's quieter because I'm further from the door at first, but I take another step and the sound drops off again. Am I being watched? Can whatever it is see me in here? I pick out a third sound, past the ringing and the knocking. A voice, whispering but getting louder and stronger. Please, Melissa, please, 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 Melissa, please, please, please. I can't tell where it's coming from at this point. It's probably an adrenaline thing or whatever, but it really sounds like it's coming from everywhere, like it's all around me. And at that point, I am more scared than I have ever been in my life. I back away from the door as far as I can get, and I'm standing over the switchboard frozen, my cheeks wet with tears, absolutely certain that I'm about to die, regretting every stupid decision, every wasted opportunity. The phone is right next to me, maybe a foot from my hand, and it's still ringing over and over and on and on. I don't need to pick it up. I can already hear what it's going to be saying. The voices from outside, almost deafening in the little room now. The banging seems to be coming from all around, not just from the door, but from the floor and the walls and the roof as well. And the whole room is shaking, and there's a little button right by my hand that I think just might save my life. Fine, I scream. Okay, fine, okay. I hit the blue button on the switchboard, the one that sends the call through, and instantly all the noise stops. On the screen, Melissa's face lights up. She's seen a little green light above the camera, the one that tells her that a call's come through. Sorry, just a second. We're getting a caller. Hello? Hello, sir? Silence. Hello, are you there? Oh. She raised her hand to her ear and looked at it. Her fingers are red, like she dipped them in a bucket of paint. The blood's flowing down her hand now, and she watches it, looking fascinated, twisting her wrist to follow the rivulet as it flows down her perfect forearm. She goes to say something, opening her mouth, and the blood bubbles out of there too. The news feed cuts out there, so that's all that basically anyone else has seen. I think I'm one of maybe 10 people who saw the rest. I saw her eyes bulge, the whites turning pink then scarlet. She didn't look scared or in pain, just confused. She had her hands under her mouth, the blood that was leaking from it pooling in her cupped palms. She raised them back to her face, like she was trying to put it back in, maybe? Maybe she was trying to just get a better look. I really don't know what was going through her head. I couldn't say how much blood she'd lost at that point, but there still wasn't any fear on her face. It was like she really couldn't understand what was happening, or couldn't believe it was happening to her. Her eyes locked on the camera, like they did every night while she spoke. Now, though, there was only me watching, and it seemed as if she knew that, as if she were looking right at me. I could almost feel her eyes on mine, still seeming to see so much even as her life flowed out around her ravaged pupils. So she spits, and there's a torrent of blood splattering out over the desk, some droplets hitting the camera lens. She goes to speak. Her eyes are staring at me, staring through me, and she reaches out a hand towards me. I find myself starting to reach back towards the screen and then hear myself gasp as she collapses. There's so much blood on the desk that it splashes as her head hits it. A carotid artery aneurysm, apparently, dead at 28. There wasn't an investigation or anything. 1,000 people had seen most of what had happened. By the next day, it was on live leak, and the number was in the hundreds of thousands. Pretty girl dies on live TV. Compelling viewing. I never said anything, not to anybody. I didn't talk to the police, didn't talk to my colleagues, didn't tell her family or mine. It was a pretty big deal locally, and I'd tell future boyfriends that I'd work at the station when it happened, but never what had actually occurred to me that night. There was knocking on my door last night, more this morning. Each time I looked out the peephole, and each time I saw nobody. Neither time was I brave enough to open the door. It'd been about a week since I started getting called. Nothing at first, just silence. The next one wasn't for 2 days, and it was silent too. The third was a day after that. and when I strained, I thought I could hear something. By the fifth call, it was unmistakable. A single repeated word over and over, whispered, but getting louder with every call. Please. Something on the tracks. I live in Monmouth, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty small town, so everyone kind of knows everyone, and all our town's history is pretty much collective. Very little happened during my childhood that everyone wasn't somehow privy to or a part of. From a pie stolen off a windowsill to my neighbor's wife cheating on him and running away with a guy she cheated with. It's this fact that made the afternoon of July 2nd, 2000 such a traumatic event. So pervasive. I was 14 at the time, running around down my street with some neighbor kids. Bisecting the street was a set of train tracks that were flanked on either side by a layer of houses and then woods for miles. It was humid, but getting cooler by the minute, and the clouds were moving in quick. So we all started heading home. I said goodbye to my friends and jogged toward my grandparents' house as rain started to fall, and that's when I heard it behind me. A train was coming down the tracks far faster than was normal. They always slowed down before reaching our little hamlet. The weirdest thing was there was no horn, no whistle, nothing, which is why I lost my friend Brian. He was crossing the tracks when it zipped by, right before it derailed into the forest. Nobody on board the train survived, and coupled with Brian's death, 45 people lost their lives that day. The company made a quick cleanup. I think they paid some restitution to the town and Brian's family, and the amount of trains that came through slowed to a crawl. In 2005, they retired that set of tracks, opting for a more direct line that didn't run through any small towns. It's at this point that it starts to get strange. In the 12 years since then, 16 people have died on the tracks. A woman slipped while walking her dog, and her head hit the tracks at the perfect angle to split her skull. The dog's leash was still in her hand, but the dog was gone. It was found dead at the edge of the woods a few days later. 4 people have had their car stalled while going over the tracks, or simply stopped, or something, nobody knows. But in each of these instances, their car stopped just as they crossed the tracks, and in each case the cause of death was heart attack. They were all older, but it's still peculiar, I think. Last year, 3 kids were playing on the tracks just about a quarter mile into the wooded area when lightning struck the tracks near where they were, killing them all instantly. In 2008, 2 different 17-year-old girls hung themselves on tree branches that now hung over the defunct rail line, one in the fall and the other in winter. A drifter was found dead lying in the middle of the tracks last year. The medical examiner ruled a death due to exposure, even though the man was fully clothed and it was only October. A family of 4 hit a deer at the intersection, killing all but the youngest son. Though the car was covered in deer blood, fur, and pieces of bone, no carcass was recovered or ever found, and the kids swore up and down it wasn't a deer and that it stood on 2 legs. That was in 2010. I heard he killed himself last year after moving away. A couple parked their car off to the side of the tracks a little ways into the wood and were found in the morning. They clearly had sex during the night, and at some point the girl slashed the guy upwards of 20 times across the throat and then killed herself by cutting her femoral artery and sitting there until she bled out. Nobody with houses that run parallel to the tracks can have pets in their yard because they always end up getting out and disappearing. I can't honestly say how many dogs and cats have vanished near or adjacent to the tracks over the last 12 years. Our golden retriever Mutt had puppies, and one by one the healthy large dogs disappeared from our yard until all that was left was our original dog, and then she disappeared too. If I went to my back fence, I could hear her barking at night for about a week after she disappeared, but one night it stopped, and then I never heard it again. When it rains, particularly in summertime and especially around the anniversary of the train derailment, there's always fresh footprints in the muddy ground to the left and right of the tracks, always walking into the woods but never out. Trail cams never pick up anything, though. For about 4 years after the incident, people put up memorials for Brian and in general for the other people that lost their lives. But slowly they would get torn down or get stolen. Pretty callous, to be honest. But with it being such a small town, nobody could ever imagine someone doing such a thing. Over time, the memorials grew, of course, because of the subsequent tragedies, but it seemed the bigger and more elaborate the memorials, the faster and with more malice they were torn down. In 2010, the town had a candlelight vigil for the 10th anniversary with a small stone monument placed in memory. The next morning it was smeared with shit, and a dead raccoon was gutted and strewn about around it. It was cleaned up, but the next night the same thing happened. The mayor had a camera set up, but it was broken, and the vandalism kept happening until the monument was moved into the town square. The woods are especially quiet around the site of the accident. No bugs, not even crickets, make noise, it seems, and there's never really any wildlife. A few years ago, a friend and I were driving out of town for a concert, and we had the radio turned on. As we approached the tracks, the radio went to static, and as we went over them, the static cleared away to horrific screaming. Dozens of voices screaming, and then silence, then static, and then the radio again, as put the tracks behind us. I nearly drove off the road in panic. We've had a lot of missing people, too. Each year seems like it's getting worse, and we get less traffic and commerce in the years since they moved the train route away. In general, the town is kind of in a slump. I'm telling you guys this for 2 reasons. One, when I brought this up to a friend at the college I'm going to, he said his grandfather worked for a railroad for a long time, and that something about the iron tracks focuses energy, negative or positive, that he's seen his share of derailments or accidents, and that the tracks seem to remember. Basically, that sites of tragedy attract more tragedy or, worse, other things. I asked him what he meant by things, and he just shrugged and said his grandpa never elaborated. The other reason is that while I was doing some research into local history, I found that there used to be another town about 20 miles south as the tracks go from Monmouth. It was called Colton, and they had a community about the size of ours, prosperous and close-knit, until they had a derailment like ours. Slowly the town fell victim to tragedy after tragedy, murders, rapes, disappearances, etc. A huge fire burned down half of the town after the 15th anniversary, killing 39 people. After that, it was a mad rush to leave. Now there's not even a signpost for Colton. Even the cemetery's gone, with the exception of a few tattered headstones and a single gnarled wrought iron fence. The rest of the graves and monuments have toppled and broken or been stolen or something. Until I found out about the town, I didn't even know why there was a graveyard there. Point is, I'm really scared for my family and friends who haven't left. I don't feel like it's safe in Monmouth anymore, but they won't leave. And I guess the only question I have now is, should I?